And at the core of venture, ultimately, it's about networks and making those networks operate effectively to not only source deals, but source talent, source insights to support founders at the end of the day. And a collaborative firm like Wellington has this unique opportunity to extract that and support these founders in really incredibly differentiated ways.
Welcome to Well Said, discussions with investors from across Wellington Management about market and geopolitical cross-currents and the long-term research required to make sense of them. I'm your host, Thomas Mucha. According to a 2020 study by the Pew Research Center, 58% of Black American adults say that supporting Black-owned businesses is an extremely important means of achieving equality. Yet just 3% of U.S. companies are today Black-owned. Now, joining me today is someone determined to get that number up. Frederik Groce is a member of Wellington Access Ventures, or WAVE. That's our private equity team focused on investing in early-stage companies run by Black, Latino, female, and other underrepresented founders. Frederik was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2021. Impressive. As was Jackson Cummings, another WAVE colleague. Frederik joins us today here in Boston to discuss the early-stage investment landscape, the importance of conscious capitalism, and how his team helps diverse founders achieve their goals. Frederik, welcome to Well Said.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in and discuss some of these topics.
Well, it's great to have you here. So let's start at the beginning. And first, tell me about your background and, what got you here to Wellington.
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of four. I've got a twin sister, obviously, two peas in a pod. Growing up, I spent most of my life on the West Coast and then sort of made my way over to the Midwest in Ohio for high school, where I spent 4 years. And then found myself back on the West Coast again for college, where I ended up going to Stanford and actually meeting Jackson Cummings, the head of Wellington Access Ventures. And so it's been a quick ride, but it's been a lot of fun. And it's been great to be able to see some of the past come into the future and kind of join me on this journey here at Wellington.
All right, so let's jump into the meat of the conversation here. So in your view, why is conscious capitalism, supporting underrepresented company founders, so important?
Yeah, so for me, conscious capitalism is really just a framing of sort of how we in markets can both make upside for those partners that are coming to us, but also at the end of the day doing good work out there and not having to find a middle ground between making upside and doing good, right? So finding that direct alignment fundamentally. And that permeates through everything that I've certainly done through my career and is at the core in many ways of what we're doing here at Wellington. So from my perspective, I think one of the key things to think about as it relates to venture capital is the fact that at the end of the day, not all things are equal. So much of this industry is dependent on networks, particularly personal networks, with respect to getting access to capital, mentors, or hiring. And so a lot of what we try to do is think about how do we, as investors, provide that to a differentiated set of founders out in the market.
Yeah, as my research on geopolitics determines, economic inequality is a major factor in destabilizing societies in the United States, but all over the world. And so I do think that this is a really important tool in addressing some of those root causes. But let's get into sort of the state of the early stage venture market. I'm curious, Frederik, what changes are you seeing in terms of how companies are approaching growth, especially in this current market environment?
Yeah, so maybe before jumping into some of the things that we're seeing that drive growth and some of the evolution that's happening in the companies, I think it's important for us to frame out just the landscape, right? What's some of the data saying here? And one of the big things we spend a lot of time looking at is just what's going on and try to put numbers. And so two data points that I want to throw out there. One, we saw that less than 1% of venture dollars went to Black-led companies. And similarly, last year, we saw less than 2.4% of dollars go to women-led companies in the United States. That's a problem in our view.
Those are terrible numbers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when we think about then, what are the changes happening given the macro on an early stage perspective? First of all, we're seeing that it's taking longer to get rounds done. Second, we're seeing that some of the underlying metrics that sort of govern the inner workings of a business in the early stages are becoming much more important. Metrics like growth efficiency. Metrics like net dollar retention are becoming more front and center. Even more importantly, we're seeing actually, unfortunately, a decline in dollars going into these diverse and underrepresented ecosystems. And so some of that data I mentioned, those are all declining data points, unfortunately, year over year from 2021, where we saw some of those numbers be incrementally larger. And so the fear that we have is, given the macro, is that we'll continue to see another decline this year unless you continue to see efforts like Wellington Access Ventures and Market really being focused on going after these underrepresented founders and supporting them in a different way.
What are some of the specific challenges that are leading to these declining numbers?
Look, ultimately it becomes where are investors spending their time and focusing, right? I think in the post-George Floyd sort of period, we saw a lot of investors, corporate America, thinking more acutely around, hey, what can we be doing to support underrepresented demographics across the United States and sometimes even globally? Now, unfortunately, as a shift towards fundamentals within a business start to come more front and center, the ability to think about some of these other sometimes considered extraneous components start to fall off. And so it's our view fundamentally that these shouldn't be thought of as extraneous, that these are fundamentally important, and that what these underrepresented founders really actually represent are markets that have just been uninvested in so far and sort of set up a huge opportunity for future growth. And as we look at venture becoming more and more global, the reality is the world is globally diverse. The world is gender diverse. And so not thinking about what are the founders that could come out of those different pockets, what could they be building, is just us leaving opportunity on the table.
So what are some of the specific things that Wave does to help founders overcome some of these big structural challenges?
Yeah, well, so first of all, we provide money, which isn't trivial.
That helps.
But outside of the capital we're providing, our team is giving founders advisory services, right? We're supporting them in terms of thinking about how do they need to set themselves up to be able to raise the next round. And a firm set up the way Wellington is set up, both on the private and public side, we're able to provide a lens and perspective that goes much further down the road than what you might be able to get from a traditional sandhill firm. Outside of those networks and perspectives on what's happening in the ecosystem, we're also able to provide introductions to next round investors. I mentioned it earlier that one of the big issues is networks and having the ability to be able to get introduced into a firm. We're able to do that, right? The entire team and the entire privates platform is filled with venture capital investors that have been doing this for decades. And so we're able to lean into those networks fundamentally. And then I think the really unique Wellington component is we're able to connect our founders into folks like our global industry analysts and experts and public market investors that deeply spend their entire careers effectively focusing on very specific problems or areas within the market. And that gives us a unique ability to support these underrepresented founders in a way that, quite frankly, didn't exist before.
There's a lot of tools in that toolbox.
A lot of tools in the toolbox, that's right.
So Fred, let's dig into the opportunity set of early stage and diverse founded venture companies here. What strikes you right now as some industry or thematic tilts to where you're sensing these opportunities?
First, I think it's important to realize that diverse individuals work in every industry and every type of company that's out there. Certainly, if you think about that from a gender perspective, that tends to be very true. And so because of that, we see founders in as diverse set of companies building as exist in the market fundamentally. Now, that isn't to say we don't see more types of sub-vertical types of companies here and there. And that tends to sort of represent the unique challenges or pains those founders are experiencing in their lives.
What are some of those?
So some of those can include digital health, for instance. We see a lot of female-led companies and diverse-led companies going after different parts of the healthcare system to get access to medical care because they've had themselves poor experiences or the data shows declining rates of care.
So these life experiences are leading to business ideas and opportunities.
Exactly. And then I think outside of that, we see a lot of companies increasingly in fintech trying to support these communities because they've historically been underbanked. And so those are two examples, but really push us to realize that the reality is because these founders exist, potentially working in any industry and company, the opportunity set is much larger than just fintech and digital health for sure.
Great. So investment cases, Fred, are made obviously on a company by company basis. But, generally speaking, What's the business case for minority-owned and managed companies? I mean, specifically, how is leadership diversity a difference maker for a company? We just mentioned experiences leading to ideas, but how do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, the types of businesses being founded can be differentiated given the type of founder experiences the founders were hunting and looking for and partnering with. Outside of that, we see that they tend to hire incredibly diverse management teams and teams themselves as well. Particularly if you were to compare them to the standard Silicon Valley thought company, which tends to be male-dominated, people that they went to school with, essentially, or were maybe in a section together, right? And so those diverse sort of management teams and companies create a more resilient culture that can navigate many of the ups and downs that come with startups, right? I mean, the average startup is going to pivot a number of times before it really achieves its ultimate product market fit. And so that resiliency matters fundamentally. And outside of that, there's lots of data that's increasingly been hitting the market that showcases that diverse teams outperform. So it's certainly our belief that we'll see that play out across our opportunity set as well.
So, Frederik, I'm on the macro team here, so I'm going to ask you a macro question. And it seems to me that expanding opportunities for underrepresented entrepreneurs can create economic value, growing the pie while enabling the capture of a bigger slice of that economic pie. So to what extent is, let's call it, appreciation of market inefficiency driving wave here?
To an extent, it is, right? I think it's us observing that there is an inefficiency in the market and our desire to invest against that. But I think it's also sort of a recognition that venture itself is becoming a global phenomenon. And again, I've said this, and you'll hear me say this over and over. The world itself is diverse. The world itself does not mirror what the last generation of Silicon Valley-based companies has looked like in terms of the founding groups. And so we expect as the industry continues to globalize that we're going to see new stakeholders engaging, and that creates a huge opportunity that, again, just hasn't been as focused upon. And so our view is our focus allows us to efficiently just sift through the thousands and thousands of companies that are being created every single year globally.
When we think about this globally, are we seeing the same kinds of disappointing numbers in terms of minority representation outside the United States? Or is the U.S. really bad in this area?
No, unfortunately, we see these dynamics play out everywhere. And again, unfortunately, the U.S. is at the epicenter of a lot of the global business and trade, right? And so these dynamics that have played out here in the Silicon Valley, a very tight-knit community that has really been the lion's share of determining where dollars move. As that evolves, one of the things we've continued to be focused on is making sure there's equitable access to these pockets fundamentally. Now, I will say what is underrepresented can evolve fundamentally as you look in global markets, right? But certainly the gender composition, we continue to see that play out similarly. And if you look into the broader, call it African diaspora that has existed, you will see the same underlying dynamics playing out where there's an inability oftentimes to access that capital.
So more work, more opportunity for you and Wave.
That's right. That's the way we see it at the end of the day.
Cool. All right. So we talk a lot on this podcast about Wellington's culture of collaboration. You hinted at that before. So since joining the firm, what's your experience here with this collaboration culture?
It's so funny. I remember being almost hit over the head about it when I was interviewing and about to join the firm.
Yeah, it comes up a lot.
It comes up so much, and I didn't know what to think about it. And it has been the most incredible surprise, which is to see it play out in every deal that we look at. And what does that mean for us, right? It's collaboration not only with the public market investors and research teams that we have, global industry analysts, global industry research, but also across some of the other private teams that we have that also have incredible investors with incredible vertical expertise in different areas. And so we're leaning into that. It enables us to go deep much faster when we're doing diligence, but after we've invested, it enables us to create a network to support our founders. And it's one of the things I continue to be the most excited about because, again, at the core of venture, ultimately, it's about networks and making those networks operate effectively to not only source deals, but source talent, source insights to support founders at the end of the day. And a collaborative firm like Wellington has this unique opportunity to extract that and support these founders in really incredibly differentiated ways.
That works both ways. Since we've been growing our privates business, our VC business, I've learned a ton from the new employees that we're bringing into Wellington on that side. So it's a two-way street. And I agree, the collaboration aspect, it's not just marketing. We do it every day.
That's right. No, it's core to the DNA of the organization. And every single individual that gets hired into the firm has that collaborative bone.
So let's talk about the future here. And as the market increasingly values diversity And if you're successful at Wave and we have more Black leaders building more networks, more communities, what are your expectations for the next 5 to 10 years here?
So I think of it as a tale of two cities right now. On one hand, we see more focused capital allocated to support these underrepresented founders than we've ever seen in the market. But I also see it becoming more challenging, which is to say the amount of capital moving into these corridors to focus on these issues, that's evolving quite a bit. And so our hope is we'll continue to see more support for these underrepresented founders in market, but also that as the macro sort of works itself out, that more capital does get reallocated to the venture ecosystem, again, to these underrepresented funds that are focusing on a different part of the broader ecosystem.
So the macro backdrop matters to the direction of this.
Yeah, the macro matters quite a bit because the amount of capital moving from limited partners into venture right now is sort of evolving in real time as we have denominator effect hitting the ecosystem.
How closely do you follow the machinations of the Fed?
A lot more today than ever before, I'd say.
Yeah, you and everybody else.
That's right. And then to be frank, it's been one of the really incredible components of coming to Wellington and doing venture here is that we have these macroeconomists and perspectives that help us sort of connect the dots. And the reality is, venture capital is highly impacted by interest rates as we're watching it work itself through the system itself. Now, the good news is where Wellington Access Ventures plays at the early stages, that's where innovation is happening at the beginning. And the innovation economy hasn't slowed down. There are people trying to build companies all over the U.S. and globally. And so that continues to make us excited because it's that innovation that will drive upside for, the public markets, investors, but also will make the world a healthier, safer, and more efficient place at the end of the day.
Love that spirit. So, Frederik, we like to end these discussions with a bit of personal information, try to get to know the person behind the professional here. And, I understand you play the saxophone, the tenor.
I do.
I'm a trumpet player, so we could go deep on this if you want. But tell me about that. And then from an investment perspective, how does music help you de-stress and focus your mind?
Yeah, so I've been playing music since I was in 3rd grade. Picked up the tenor in 5th grade, and it's been a big part of my life.
You're a Coltrane guy, right?
I'm a Coltrane guy, absolutely. I mean, if you love jazz, Coltrane is one of the GOATs. It's been a place for me not only, I think, to de-stress and vent things that you can't put to words in different ways through soloing and engaging with others in jazz combos over the years. But it's also been an interesting place to think about similarities to the venture world, right? You've got to be able to be listening constantly to things happening around you while staying focused on what you're doing. It's about being creative and not being scared to go on your own beat down a path that others might not have gone through, but also the knowledge that there is going to be a safety at home. There is always going to be a chorus, a melody you can come back to, a set of chords that are at the core of the piece that give you that true north. And I think of that as, business fundamentals, right? The fundamentals of looking at a company are sort of that true core north for us in many ways, even if the companies, may go off of different strategies and may pivot 4 times from the initial investment. And so it's definitely got a lot of similarities. I think it's made me more open to being able to just deal with anything being thrown at me and not being scared to do that, because as you might know, there's nothing more fun than a jazz combo playing around and just throwing a solo at somebody that wasn't expecting it and seeing what happens and how they navigate on the proverbial stage.
I completely agree. I've always thought of jazz as the ultimate collaboration.
Absolutely.
You have to listen to everybody. You're all on the same page, but everyone has their own thing, and you listen, and one thing reacts to another thing.
And there are rules, but you can break them.
You can break those rules, but you got to know where the rules are and where the lines are. And
that's right.
So I think you and I need to start the Wellington Jazz Quintet.
We just need a drummer and a bass player, and then we're ready to go.
All right, my friend. Well, thank you so much for spending the time here with us, Frederik. Once again, Frederik Groce, a member of Wellington Access Ventures. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
The Well Said podcast is produced by Wellington Management. The executive producer is Kristen Ganong. Our senior producers are Mark Murphy, Dana Wickstead, and Colin Hopkins. Our sound engineer is Mark Murphy. This episode is mixed and edited by Mark Murphy. You can find this episode, as well as others, in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All investing involves risk, including potential loss of principal. Past results are not a reliable indicator of future results. forward-looking statements should not be considered as guarantees or predictions of future events. This material was current as of the publication date. Wellington assumes no duty to update the content in the event the information changes. This commentary is provided for informational purposes only. It is not research that is required to be prepared in accordance with legal requirements designed to promote the independence of investment research, and it is not subject to any prohibition on dealing ahead of the dissemination of investment research. It should not be viewed as a current or past recommendation and is not intended to constitute investment advice or an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to purchase any securities. It does not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Wellington Management does not provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. The views expressed are those of the speaker and may not reflect the views of others at Wellington. This recording may not be reproduced or distributed in whole or in part for any purpose without the express written consent of Wellington Management. Please refer to the disclosure section of this podcast for complete details.